In a run-down apartment building, a 12-year-old girl was about to uncover a neighborhood conspiracy. What started as Christmas morning excitement took a shocking turn when she came face to face with soggy wrapping paper and a cryptic note reading, "Santa doesn't visit." Maya Rodriguez wasn't your typical middle schooler. For years, she had spent her life watching her single mother work 3 jobs to keep them afloat, known for her fierce independence and unwavering sense of justice. When she discovered her Christmas presents dumped in the building's dumpster like garbage, she had no idea she was walking into a web of neighborhood resentment and hidden struggles. Maya's determination to find the truth would lead to exposing the building supervisor's twisted sense of justice and the financial desperation driving families to judge each other. What began as a simple case of stolen presents would become a community reckoning. The entire apartment building would never be the same after Maya chose understanding over revenge, transforming isolated neighbors into a chosen family through the power of restorative justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's eyes snapped open at exactly 6:17 a.m., the same way they had every Christmas morning since she could remember. The familiar thrill shot through her chest, that electric anticipation that made her fingertips tingle and her heart race. She lay still for a moment, savoring the feeling before it could be touched by disappointment or the complicated realities that seemed to crowd everything else in her life. The apartment was quiet. Mom's bed was still empty, which meant she was finishing her shift at the office building downtown. Maya had gotten used to Emma's schedule: nights at the janitorial service, weekends catering events, afternoons at the retail store when they needed extra help. It was just how things were. But Christmas morning was different. Christmas morning was supposed to be magic. Maya padded barefoot across the cold linoleum floor, her breath visible in small puffs. The radiator had been acting up again, making those clanking sounds that kept her awake some nights. She pulled her robe tighter and stepped into their small living room, where their tree sat in the corner, a modest pine that Emma had bought from the lot on Christmas Eve for half price. The tree looked exactly as it had when Maya went to bed. No presents underneath, nothing wrapped in bright paper with her name carefully written in Emma's precise handwriting. Maya stared at the empty space beneath the tree, feeling something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd known money was tight. She'd seen the worry lines around her mother's eyes deepen over the past few months, had noticed how Emma counted and recounted the bills before paying them. But this was Christmas. Even in their worst years, there had always been something. Maybe Mom hid them, she whispered to herself, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. She searched their small apartment methodically. The coat, closet where Emma sometimes stashed birthday presents, behind the couch, in Emma's bedroom, though that felt like crossing a line she rarely breached. Nothing. The building's hallway was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulb on the second floor flickering the way it had for months. Maya made her way downstairs, past Mr. Ray Chen's apartment where she could smell coffee brewing, past the Kim's place where classical music played softly. She'd never really talked to her neighbors much. Emma always said it was better to keep to themselves, not to bother people with their problems. The back exit led to the alley where the dumpsters sat in a neat row. Maya almost turned back, feeling foolish for even looking when she saw them. Her presents. 3 carefully wrapped packages, the ones she'd watched Emma work on late at night when she thought Maya was asleep. The paper was soaked through from the morning rain, the ribbons dark and sodden. They sat among the garbage bags like discarded thoughts. Maya's hands shook as she pulled them from the wet trash. The wrapping paper fell away in soggy chunks, revealing a journal she'd mentioned wanting months ago, a set of colored pencils, and a small framed photo of her and Emma from last summer. Simple gifts, but chosen with care. Now ruined. Underneath the largest package, she found a piece of paper, torn at the edges with words written in block letters. Santa doesn't visit. The rest of the message was missing, the paper ripped where it might have continued. Maya stood in the alley, holding the waterlogged remains of her Christmas morning, and felt something break open inside her chest. Not just disappointment, she'd handled that before. This was violation. Someone had taken her mother's hard work, her sacrifice, her love, and thrown it away like garbage. The sound of the back door opening made her turn. Emma stood there, still in her janitorial uniform, her hair pulled back in a tired bun. She'd clearly been planning to sneak in and shower before Maya woke up, the way she always did after her night shifts. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the scene. Maya standing among the dumpsters, holding the ruined presents, the torn note clutched in her fist. "Mia!" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What? How did—" Maya watched her mother's face cycle through confusion, then understanding, then a pain so deep it made Maya's own chest ache. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the damaged gifts, and Maya realized she was looking at more than disappointment. This was devastation. Every extra hour Emma had worked, every sacrifice she'd made to afford these simple presents, someone had decided it was all worthless. Who would do this? Maya's voice came out steadier than she felt. The question wasn't just about the presents anymore. It was about dignity, about respect, about the careful balance Emma maintained to keep them safe and housed in this building. Emma's jaw tightened, and Maya saw something she rarely witnessed in her mother: anger. Real, deep anger that went beyond frustration with broken radiators or late bills. "I don't know, baby," Emma said, but her voice carried an edge Maya had never heard before. "But this isn't right." Maya looked at the note again, studying the handwriting, the way the letters were formed. This wasn't random. Someone in their building, someone who knew them, who knew where they lived, who had access to wherever Emma had hidden these gifts, had done this deliberately. "I'm going to find out who," Maya said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Emma started to protest, the way she always did when Maya tried to handle grown-up problems. But then she looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and seemed to recognize something in Maya's expression that went beyond childish anger. "We should call the police," Emma said, though even as she spoke the words, Maya could hear the uncertainty beneath them. "And tell them what? That someone threw away our Christmas presents?" Maya shook her head. "They'll ask questions about us, about why we can't just replace them." Emma's face tightened. Maya was right, and they both knew it. Involving authorities meant exposing their situation, inviting scrutiny into their carefully maintained privacy. Maya folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Someone in this building thought they could treat her family this way. Someone thought they could take Emma's hard work and throw it in the trash like it meant nothing. They were wrong. Maya looked up at the windows of their building, studying each one. Behind those glass panes were people who saw Emma leaving, for work at all hours, who heard their footsteps in the hallway, who shared this space with them every day. One of them had crossed a line that went far beyond stealing presents. "I'm going to find out who did this, Mom," Maya said again, her voice carrying a determination that surprised them both. Emma studied her daughter's face and saw something that made her proud and worried in equal measure. Maya wasn't just angry. She was focused, purposeful, ready to fight for what mattered. The rain continued to fall around them, washing away the remains of their Christmas morning. But it couldn't wash away Maya's resolve. Somewhere in this building was the person who thought they could diminish her family's worth. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The rain continued to fall around them, washing away the remains of their Christmas morning. But it couldn't wash away Maya's resolve. Somewhere in this building was the person who thought they could diminish her family's worth. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Maya helped Emma carry the damaged gifts upstairs, her mind already working through possibilities. Once inside their apartment, Emma disappeared into the bathroom to shower off her night shift, while Maya sat at their small kitchen table, spreading out the torn note and studying it under the overhead light. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Not the scrawled anger of impulse, but something planned. Maya traced the letters with her finger, memorizing the slant of the S and the way the V connected to the I. This person had taken time to think about what they were doing. When Emma emerged from the shower, wrapped in her old terrycloth robe, Maya was still studying the note. "Maya, you need to let this go," Emma said, though her voice lacked conviction. Sometimes bad things just happen." "Not like this," Maya replied. "This was personal, Mom. Someone wanted to hurt us specifically." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee from the pot Maya had started. "Maybe we should call Detective Santos. You remember him? He came to your school last year to talk about community safety." Maya looked up from the note. She could see the war playing out across her mother's face, the desire for justice battling against years of trained caution. Emma had always taught her to keep their heads down, to not draw attention. Calling the police felt like waving a flag that announced their vulnerability. "What would we tell him?" Maya asked gently. "That someone threw away presents we can't afford to replace?" Emma's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. The question hung between them, highlighting everything they both understood but rarely spoke aloud. Maya made her decision. "I'm going to talk to Mr. Chen." "Maya, no, he doesn't like to be bothered. He sits by his window all day," Maya interrupted. "If anyone saw something, it would be him." Before Emma could protest further, Maya was at the door, still in her pajamas and robe. The hallway was warmer than their apartment, the building's heating system working better on the lower floors. Mr. Chen's apartment was 1B, right by the Yi main entrance. Maya had passed his door hundreds of times, occasionally hearing the television or catching the scent of his cooking, but they'd never exchanged more than polite nods. Emma always said he preferred to be left alone. Maya knocked softly, then waited. Nothing. She knocked again, a little louder. "Go away," came a gruff voice from inside. "Building management doesn't work on Christmas." "Mr. Chen, it's Maya Rodriguez from 3A. I need to ask you something." A long pause. Then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened just wide enough for one weathered eye to peer out. "What do you want?" His voice carried the flat suspicion of someone who'd dealt with too many people wanting things he couldn't give. Maya held up the soggy note. "Someone threw away my Christmas presents last night. I found them in the dumpster with this note. I was wondering if maybe you saw anything unusual." The eyes studying her narrowed. "You think I spend my time spying on the neighbors?" "No, sir. You have the best view of the back alley from your living room window. I thought maybe you might have noticed something." Mr. Chen's expression shifted slightly. Maya could see him weighing something, deciding whether she was worth his time or just another interruption in his carefully ordered solitude. "Show me the note," he said finally. Maya handed it through the crack in the door. She watched his face change as he read the torn message. "Santa doesn't visit," Mr. Chen repeated, his voice thoughtful now rather than dismissive. "Someone's got strong opinions about who deserves what." The door opened wider. Mr. Chen was smaller than Maya had imagined, wearing a cardigan that had seen better decades and slippers that whispered against the hardwood floor as he moved. "Come in," he said. "Coffee's still warm." Mr. Chen's apartment was the mirror image of theirs but felt completely different. Where their place was sparse by necessity, his was sparse by choice. Everything had a place. Everything served a purpose. The only indulgence was a wall of photographs, decades of postal service, a younger Mr. Chen with a woman who must have been his wife, pictures of places Maya didn't recognize. "Sit." Mr. Chen gestured to a chair positioned precisely to view. both the front window and the television. "You want to know what I saw last night?" Maya nodded, accepting the coffee cup he pressed into her hands even though she didn't really drink coffee. Mr. Chen settled into his chair, his eyes focusing on something beyond the window. "I don't sleep much anymore. Margaret, my wife, she used to say I was half owl, always up at odd hours. Last night around 11:30, I saw someone by the dumpsters." Maya's heart jumped. "Who?" "Couldn't tell from here. Too dark, and they were careful to stay in the shadows. But I saw them, moving between the buildings. Knew it wasn't the garbage pickup. That doesn't happen until Thursday." He paused, studying Maya's face. "You're Emma Rodriguez's girl. Your mother works nights." It wasn't a question, and Maya nodded. "Good woman, your mother, always holds the door for old Mrs. Kowalski when she comes back from her dialysis appointments. Never asks for anything, never complains about the noise from 2C or the broken mailbox locks." Maya felt something warm settle in her chest. She hadn't realized. Mr. Chen noticed these things. "This building," Mr. Chen continued, "it's got all kinds of people. The Kims up on 4, they do well for themselves. Run some kind of internet business. Mrs. Patterson and her boy, they're struggling since her husband passed. Old Mrs. Kowalski. She gets by on Social Security and whatever her son sends when he remembers. Your mother works 3 jobs to keep you both fed and housed." Maya stared at him. He knew. He'd been watching, cataloging the small dramas and daily struggles of everyone under this roof. "Point is," Mr. Chen said, "someone in this building thinks they have the right to judge who deserves what. That note of yours? That's not just about Christmas presents. That's about someone deciding your family doesn't measure up to their standards." The anger in his voice surprised Maya. It wasn't the casual irritation of someone bothered by noise or inconvenience. This was deeper, personal. "Will you help me find out who?" Maya asked. Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, staring out his window at the gray Christmas morning. When he looked back at Maya, something had shifted in his expression. "Margaret used to volunteer at the food bank," he said quietly. "She always said the worst thing about being poor wasn't the lack of money. It was how it made other people think they had the right to decide whether you deserved basic dignity." He stood up, moving to a small desk by the window. "I've been keeping track of who comes and goes in this building for 30 years. Postal workers, we notice patterns. We see things." Maya watched him pull out a small notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting. "I think I know who you should talk to next," Mr. Chen said. "That Kim girl on the 4th floor. Sophia. She keeps odd hours and her bedroom window faces the alley. If someone was moving around back there last night, she might have seen more than I did." Maya felt a spark of hope. "Do you think she'll talk to me?" Mr. Chen studied her face, seeing something that made him nod slowly. "I think you might be surprised by who's willing to help when you ask the right questions." He handed her the notebook. "This has everyone's work schedules when they come and go. Might help you figure out who had opportunity." Maya stared at the notebook, overwhelmed by this unexpected alliance. "Why are you helping me?" Mr. Chen's expression softened, revealing glimpses of the man behind the gruff exterior. "Because 30 years ago, someone helped me when I needed it. And because what happened to your family, that's not justice. That's just cruelty dressed up as teaching a lesson." Maya clutched the notebook, feeling for the first time since finding the ruined presents that she wasn't facing this alone. Maya clutched the notebook, feeling for the first time since finding the ruined presents that she wasn't facing this alone. She climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, Mr. Chen's observations running through her mind. The Kim family's apartment was at the end of the hall, and as Maya approached, she could hear the soft classical music that seemed to play constantly from their unit. She'd always wondered what it would be like to live in a family where music played just because it was beautiful, not because you were trying to drown out the sounds of neighbors arguing or radiators clanking. Maya knocked softly on 4C. The music stopped abruptly, followed by hushed voices speaking in what sounded like Korean. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal Sophia Kim. Maya had seen Sophia around the building for years, but they'd never really talked. Sophia was 14, 2 years older, and moved through the world with the careful quietness of someone who preferred not to be noticed. She was smaller than Maya had expected, with dark hair that fell across her face like a curtain she could hide behind. "Oh," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi, Maya." The fact that Sophia knew her name surprised Maya. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas morning, but I was wondering if I could ask you something." Sophia's eyes darted past Maya, checking the hallway as if looking for escape routes. What about?" "Someone threw away my Christmas presents last night. Put them in the dumpsters out back. Mr. Chen said you might have seen something from your window." Maya watched Sophia's face carefully. The older girl's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, concern, and then something that looked like fear. I didn't see anything," Sophia said quickly. Too quickly. Maya had learned to read people's faces from years of watching her mother navigate difficult conversations with landlords and bill collectors. Sophia was lying, but not in the way someone lies to be cruel. She was lying the way someone lies when they're scared. "Could I maybe come in for just a minute?" Maya asked gently. "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I just want to understand what happened." Sophia glanced back into her apartment, where Maya could hear the soft murmur of voices, her parents, probably discussing whether to get involved in building drama. "We could talk in the stairwell," Sophia offered, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind her. They sat on the stairs between the 4th and 3rd floors, Sophia perched on the edge of the step like she might need to flee at any moment. Maya settled beside her, leaving enough space so Sophia wouldn't feel trapped. "I know this is weird," Maya began. "We don't really know each other, but someone took my mom's Christmas presents she worked really hard to afford, and threw them away like garbage, and left this note." Maya showed Sophia the torn paper. She watched the older girl's face crumple as she read the words. "Oh no," Sophia whispered. That's horrible." "You did see something, didn't you?" Maya asked softly. Sophia was quiet for so long that Maya thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I have insomnia sometimes. Anxiety, my mom calls it. I was up late working on this art project, and I heard voices outside. Angry voices." Maya felt her heart speed up. "What kind of voices?" "A woman. She was talking to herself, kind of muttering. About people who don't appreciate what they have. About teaching lessons." Sophia's hands twisted in her lap. "I looked out my window and saw her by the dumpsters. She had some packages with her." "Did you recognize her?" Sophia nodded miserably. "Mrs. Patterson, from downstairs. She's the building supervisor." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Mrs. Patterson had access to everything: keys to the basement, the mailroom, probably even emergency keys to apartments. If she'd wanted to take Maya's presents, she could have done it easily. "Why didn't you say anything?" Maya asked, though she tried to keep any accusation out of her voice. Sophia's face flushed with shame. Because I knew if I said something, people would ask questions about what I was doing up so late, about why I was watching from my window, and then they'd remember that my family, that we—" She trailed off, but Maya understood. The Kims were the only family in the building who seemed financially comfortable. Their apartment was bigger. They drove a newer car. Sophia always had nice clothes and a good laptop for school. "You were afraid people would think you were judging them," Maya said quietly. "Everyone already thinks that," Sophia said, tears forming in her eyes. "I see how the other kids at school look at me when I mention living downtown instead of in the suburbs. And here in the building, I know people notice that my parents don't work traditional jobs, that we don't struggle the way other families do. Maya studied Sophia's face, seeing something she'd never expected. Guilt. Deep, genuine guilt about having things that others didn't. I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to her son a few weeks ago, Sophia continued. She was upset about something, saying people didn't appreciate community support, that some families acted entitled when neighbors tried to help. Community support? Maya asked. There was this thing last month. Someone organized a food drive for families who might need help for the holidays. My mom wanted to contribute, but Mrs. Patterson, she made it weird, started talking about who deserved help and who was just taking advantage. Maya felt pieces clicking into place. Did my mom take anything from the food drive? No, Sophia said quickly. That's what was so strange. Your mom actually brought things to donate even though… She stopped herself. Even though we probably needed it more than we could afford to give it, Maya finished. Sophia nodded, looking miserable. Mrs. Patterson was really upset about that. She kept saying it proved some people didn't understand their place, that they needed to learn gratitude. Maya felt anger building, but also something else, a clearer picture of what had happened. This wasn't random cruelty. This was Mrs. Patterson's twisted attempt to teach what she thought was a lesson about humility and gratitude. I should have said something when I saw her, Sophia said, tears spilling over now. I should have called down to her or called the police. But I was scared of making things worse, of people thinking my family was just stirring up trouble because we think we're better than everyone else. Maya looked at this girl who was 2 years older, but seemed just as lost as she felt. Sophia had been carrying the weight of witnessing something wrong, paralyzed by her own privilege, and the fear that speaking up would only prove what people already suspected about her family. You're telling me now, Maya said gently. That matters. Sophia wiped her eyes. What are you going to do? Maya thought about Mrs. Patterson, the building supervisor who had keys to everything, who had appointed herself judge of who deserved what. She thought about her mother's pride, about the careful way Emma navigated every interaction in the building to avoid seeming like she needed help or pity. I'm going to talk to her, Maya said. But first, I need to understand why she thought she had the right to do this. Sophia looked at her with something like admiration. You're braver than I am. You spoke up, Maya pointed out. Even when you were scared. That's brave too. For the first time since Maya had knocked on her door, Sophia smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. If you need someone to back up what I saw, Sophia said quietly, I'll do it. I'm tired of being scared of what people think about my family. What Mrs. Patterson did was wrong, no matter what anyone's financial situation is. Maya felt something warm bloom in her chest, not just the relief of having evidence, but the unexpected gift of an ally. Someone who understood that the building's complex social dynamics affected everyone, just in different ways. Now she had to decide how to use what she'd learned. Mrs. Patterson had power in this building, and confronting her wrong could make things much worse for Maya's family. But letting this stand would mean accepting that some people had the right to judge others' worth based on their own twisted sense of justice. Maya stood up from the stairs, feeling the weight of Mr. Chen's notebook in her pocket and Sophia's confession echoing in her ears. She had evidence now. The question was what to do with it. Maya stood up from the stairs, feeling the weight of Mr. Chen's notebook in her pocket and Sophia's confession echoing in her ears. She had evidence now. The question was what to do with it. She found Mrs. Patterson in the building's lobby, wrestling, with a string of Christmas lights that had apparently given up working sometime during the night. The older woman was muttering under her breath as she untangled the mess, her movements sharp with frustration. Maya took a deep breath and approached slowly. Mrs. Patterson was 52. Though she looked older, with graying hair pulled back severely and lines around her eyes that spoke of constant worry. She wore a faded cardigan over her building supervisor uniform, a polo shirt with the management company's logo that had seen better years. "Mrs. Patterson?" Maya's voice came out steadier than she felt. The older woman looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to something guarded when she saw Maya. "What do you need, Maya?" "I'm busy trying to fix these lights before the management company decides we can't have decorations at all." Maya noticed how Mrs. Patterson's hands trembled slightly as she worked with the tangled lights, not from age, but from something else. Stress, maybe, or caffeine, or the kind of anxiety that came from carrying too much responsibility with too little support. "I wanted to ask you about something that happened last night," Maya said carefully. "Someone took my Christmas presents and threw them in the dumpster. They left a note." Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled on the lights. "That's terrible," she said, but her voice sounded rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. "Did you call the police?" "Not yet," Maya replied, watching Mrs. Patterson's face. "I wanted to understand what happened first. The note said, 'Santa doesn't visit,' but the rest was torn off." "Sounds like kids playing pranks," Mrs. Patterson said quickly, returning her attention to the lights with renewed intensity. "You know how teenagers can be during the holidays. All that energy and nowhere to put it." Maya felt her pulse quicken. Mrs. Patterson's deflection was too smooth, too immediate. "Mr. Chen saw someone by the dumpsters around 11:30 last night. An adult." Mrs. Patterson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Chen sees a lot of things from that window of his, sometimes more than what actually happens." "Sophia Kim was awake too," Maya pressed gently. "She heard voices, someone talking about teaching lessons to people who don't appreciate what they have." The Christmas light slipped from Mrs. Patterson's hands, clattering to the floor in a tangled mess. When she looked up, her face had transformed from carefully neutral to something harder, more defensive. "Is that what this is about?" Mrs. Patterson's voice carried a sharp edge now. "You're going around the building, questioning neighbors, stirring up drama on Christmas morning." "I'm trying to understand why someone would throw away my mother's Christmas presents," Maya replied, standing her ground despite the shift in Mrs. Patterson's tone. "Your mother's presents," Mrs. Patterson repeated, something bitter creeping into her voice. "Let me ask you something, Maya. Do you know how many families in this building are struggling? Really struggling? Do you know how many kids won't have anything under their trees this morning?" Maya felt confused by the direction of the conversation. What does that have to do with everything?" Mrs. Patterson snapped. "It has everything to do with it. When some families are working 3 jobs just to make rent, maybe other families should think twice before expecting elaborate Christmas mornings." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Elaborate? 3 presents from the dollar store is elaborate? Mrs. Patterson's face flushed, and Maya realized she'd revealed more than she'd intended. "I didn't say. I never said anything about dollar store presents." "But you know what they were," Maya said quietly. "Because you saw them. You took them." The lobby felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with tension. Maya was aware of footsteps on the stairs above them, other residents moving around, going about their Christmas morning routines, unaware of the confrontation unfolding below. "You want to know what I think?" Mrs. Patterson's voice rose slightly, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "I think some people in this building need to learn gratitude. Real gratitude. Not the kind that comes from always getting what you want, but the kind that comes from understanding what you actually need." Maya stared at her, pieces falling into place. "You threw away my presents because you thought we didn't deserve them. I threw them away because your mother donated food to the holiday drive when she should have been taking from it," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking now with emotion that had been building for weeks. "Because she's too proud to accept help. from neighbors who are better off, but not too proud to let her 12-year-old daughter expect Christmas presents when there are families in this building who can't afford groceries. The accusation hung in the air between them. Maya felt her own anger building, but underneath it was something else, a growing understanding of the complex web of resentment and judgment that Mrs. Patterson had been carrying. "My mom works 70 hours a week," Maya said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. She donated to that food drive because she wanted to help other families, not because she was showing off. 70 hours a week and still can't afford decent Christmas presents, Mrs. Patterson shot back. Maybe if she accepted help instead of acting like she was too good for charity, her daughter wouldn't be so disappointed on Christmas morning. The sound of a door opening echoed through the lobby. Mr. Chen appeared on the stairs, followed by Sophia and her parents. Maya realized their voices had been carrying throughout the building. "What's going on down here?" Mr. Chen's voice was calm, but carried authority. Mrs. Patterson looked around at the growing audience, her face cycling through emotions, anger, embarrassment, and something that looked like panic. "Nothing that concerns anyone else," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Just a misunderstanding about some missing packages." "Not missing," Maya said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stolen. Mrs. Patterson took my Christmas presents and threw them in the dumpster because she decided my family doesn't deserve them." A collective intake of breath from the assembled neighbors. Maya saw Sophia's parents exchange glances, their faces showing shock and concern. Mr. Chen's expression darkened. "That's not— You're twisting what I said," Mrs. Patterson stammered. "I was trying to teach a lesson about gratitude, about understanding that Christmas isn't about material things." "Whose lesson to teach?" Mr. Chen's voice cut through, her explanation like ice. "Who appointed you judge of what other people's children deserve?" Mrs. Patterson's composure finally cracked completely. "Someone has to," she said, tears forming in her eyes. "Someone has to care about what's happening in this building. About families who are struggling but too proud to ask for help. About kids who think they're entitled to things their parents can't afford. About people who don't appreciate what they have." Maya looked at this woman who had seemed so powerful, so intimidating, and saw something she hadn't expected. Pain. Deep, desperate pain that had twisted good intentions into something harmful and cruel. "You had no right," Maya said, but her voice was gentler now. "Whatever you were trying to teach, you had no right to take my mother's hard work and throw it away." Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes, looking around at the neighbors who had gathered to witness her breakdown. I have work to do," she said shakily. "The building doesn't manage itself." She started toward the management office but stopped when a new voice spoke from the stairwell. "Mom, wait. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Jamie Patterson stood on the landing, still in his pajamas, his face showing the kind of embarrassment that came from witnessing a parent's public humiliation. He was 16, tall and lanky, with his mother's worried eyes but a gentler set to his mouth. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "We need to talk," Jamie said quietly. The gathered neighbors slowly dispersed, their whispered conversations echoing in the stairwell as they retreated to their apartments. Mrs. Patterson disappeared into the management office, the door closing with a sharp click that seemed to echo her retreat from the confrontation. Maya found herself alone in the lobby with Jamie, who looked like he hadn't slept much the night before. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and there were circles under his eyes that spoke of worry that went beyond typical teenage concerns. "I'm sorry," Jamie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What my mom did. It wasn't right." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine anguish there. Jamie was 2 years older than Sophia, but right now he looked younger than Maya felt, weighed down by responsibilities that shouldn't belong to someone his age. "You knew," Maya said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Jamie nodded miserably. "I found the wrapping paper in our trash this morning. Pieces of it anyway. And I heard her on the phone last night, talking to herself about teaching lessons." He ran a hand through his hair. "I should have stopped her. I should have known. She would do something like this." "Why didn't you?" Jamie was quiet for a long moment, looking out the lobby window at the gray Christmas morning. When he spoke, his voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for months. "Because she's been different since Dad died, and because part of what she said last night. Part of it made sense, even though what she did was completely wrong." Maya felt her anger warring with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Jamie glanced toward the management office, then gestured toward the stairwell. "Can we sit? It's complicated." They settled on the stairs where Maya had talked with Sophia earlier. Jamie seemed to be searching for words, his hands fidgeting with the drawstring of his pajama pants. "Dad died 8 months ago," he began. "Heart attack at work. He was only 53, and we thought we had decent insurance, but..." He shook his head. "Medical bills, funeral costs, and then Mom found out Dad had been borrowing against his life insurance to help cover my sister's college tuition." Maya felt something shift in her understanding. She'd known Mr. Patterson had died, the whole building had known, but she hadn't realized the financial implications for Jamie's family. "Mom's been struggling ever since," Jamie continued. "The building supervisor job doesn't pay much, and she's been trying to find evening work, but it's hard with her back problems. We're behind on our mortgage payments for the house she and, Dad owned before we moved here." "You might lose your house?" "Probably." Jamie's voice was flat, like he'd accepted a reality that still felt surreal. "Mom's been talking to lawyers about bankruptcy, but she's too proud to actually file. She keeps thinking she can work her way out of it." Maya thought about her own mother's pride, the way Emma worked multiple jobs rather than accept help. That's why she was so upset about the food drive. Jamie nodded. "She organized it thinking it would help families who needed it more than we do. But then your mom donated instead of taking anything, and Mom, she took it personally, like your family was showing off or something." "That's ridiculous," Maya said, but without the heat she'd felt earlier. She was beginning to understand the twisted logic that had led to last night's events. "I know it's ridiculous," Jamie said quickly. "That's what I told her. But she's been so angry lately, at everything. At Dad for dying and leaving us in debt. At the insurance company for not covering everything. At herself for not being able to fix it all." He paused. "And at families like yours, who seem to manage their struggles with more dignity than she can manage hers." Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's heating problems. "She's jealous of us?" "Not jealous exactly. More like, are frustrated. She sees your mom working all those jobs and still managing to donate to charity, still putting together Christmas presents for you, and it makes her feel like she's failing." Jamie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Like, if your family can handle being poor with grace, then her bitterness and anger make her a bad person." The complexity of it hit Maya like a wave. Mrs. Patterson hadn't thrown away the presents out of simple cruelty, but out of a desperate need to prove that struggling families shouldn't have to be grateful and dignified all the time. That it was okay to be angry and bitter when life wasn't fair. She thought if you had a terrible Christmas morning, it would somehow make her feel less guilty about how angry she's been. Jamie continued. Like proving that no one could handle loss and hardship without breaking down the way she has. Maya sat in stunned silence, processing this revelation. But that's horrible logic. I know, Jamie said, his voice thick with emotion. I've been trying to help her see it, but she's been so lost since Dad died. She used to be the kindest person I knew. She volunteered at the food bank, organized community events, always helped neighbors when they needed it. But grief has made her. He struggled for words. Twisted. She can't see past her own pain. Anymore. Maya thought about her mother, about how Emma had managed to maintain her dignity and kindness despite their struggles. Then she thought about Mrs. Patterson, drowning in loss and debt and the impossible pressure of trying to hold everything together alone. "I've been working extra hours at the grocery store," Jamie said, "trying to help with bills, but it's not enough. And watching Mom become someone I don't recognize. It's been the worst part of this whole year." "Why are you telling me this?" Maya asked gently. Jamie looked at her directly for the first time since they'd started talking. "Because what she did to your family was wrong, no matter what she was feeling. And because I want to help fix it, even if it means admitting publicly that my mom is the kind of person who would throw away a child's Christmas presents." Maya saw the courage it took for him to say that. The choice to do what was right even when it meant betraying family loyalty. "What do you think we should do?" she asked. "I don't know," Jamie admitted. "But I know my mom needs help, real help, not just someone telling her to stop being bitter. And I know your family deserves an apology that actually means something, not just words." Maya found herself thinking about the complicated web of struggle and pride and grief that connected all the families in their building. Mrs. Patterson's actions were inexcusable, but they came from a place of pain that Maya was only beginning to understand. "I need to talk to my mom," Maya said finally, "about all of this. About why she donated to the food drive when we needed help ourselves. About how our pride affects other people." Jamie nodded. "And I need to figure out how to help my mom without enabling her to hurt other people." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two teenagers trying to navigate problems that felt too big for their age. "Maya?" Jamie's voice was hesitant. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that not everyone in the Patterson family thinks your family deserves to be treated badly. Some of us think your mom is pretty amazing for handling everything the way she does." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from the unexpected gift of understanding and alliance. She was beginning to realize that solving the mystery of her ruined Christmas morning was going to require more than just identifying the culprit. It was going to require understanding the complicated ways that economic struggle and pride and grief connected every family in their building. She was beginning to realize that solving the mystery of her ruined Christmas morning was going to require more than just identifying the culprit. It was going to require understanding the complicated ways that economic struggle and pride and grief connected every family in their building. Maya climbed the stairs to their apartment, her mind churning with everything Jamie had revealed. The hallway felt different now, not just a passage between apartments, but a space where the invisible threads of neighbors' lives intersected in ways she'd never considered. She found Emma sitting at their small kitchen table, still in her robe, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The ruined Christmas presents were spread out on newspaper beside her, and Maya could see that Emma had been trying to salvage what she could, smoothing out the wrapping paper, testing whether the colored pencils still worked after their soaking. "Mom," Maya said, settling into the chair across from her, "we need to talk." Emma looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or exhaustion or both. "Mija, I know you're upset about Christmas morning, but—" "Not about the presents," Maya interrupted, gently. "About us. About why Mrs. Patterson thought she had the right to do what she did." Emma's hands stilled on the damaged wrapping paper. "What do you mean?" Maya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Jamie Patterson told me that his mom was upset because you donated to the food drive instead of taking from it. She thought you were showing off, pretending to be better off than you are. Emma's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. That's ridiculous. I donated because I wanted to help when we needed help ourselves, Maya finished quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Emma's coffee cup rattled slightly as she set it down, her hands trembling with emotion she'd been holding back for months. Maya, you don't understand. Then help me understand, Maya said, her voice firmer than she felt. Help me understand why you work at the office building until 2 in the morning, then get up at 6 to work at the retail store. Help me understand why we eat rice and beans 5 nights a week, but you still put money in the collection jar at the grocery store. Help me understand why Mrs. Patterson thinks we're pretending to be something we're not. Emma stared at her daughter, and Maya saw something shift in her expression, the careful protective mask she'd worn for years beginning to crack. Because I refuse to let this world make you feel ashamed of who you are, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. Because I refuse to let you grow up thinking that needing help makes you less than anyone else. But we do need help, Maya said gently. Don't we? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the pattern on their worn tablecloth. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. When I was your age in El Salvador, my family was very poor. Not just struggling, truly poor. And when we came to this country, we depended on charity for everything. Church groups, community, organizations, government assistance. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. And every time someone helped us, they made sure we knew it. Made sure we felt grateful enough, humble enough, desperate enough to deserve their kindness. Maya felt her chest tighten. She'd never heard these details about Emma's childhood, about their family's early years in America. I remember standing in line at food pantries while people looked at us like we were criminals for needing help. I remember caseworkers who talked to my mother like she was stupid because her English wasn't perfect yet. I remember kids at school who found out I got free lunch and made sure everyone knew it. Emma's voice grew stronger, though tears were flowing freely now. I swore that when I had my own daughter, she would never have to feel that shame, that she would never have to stand in those lines or explain why her family needed help, or apologize for existing in a world that costs more than we can afford. Maya reached across the table and took her mother's hand. So you work 3 jobs to avoid asking for help. I work 3 jobs so you can hold your head up in this building. So you can go to school without worrying about lunch money or field trip fees. So when your teacher asks the class to bring supplies for projects, you don't have to be the kid who can't contribute. The depth of Emma's sacrifice hit Maya like a physical blow. Every extra hour, every weekend shift, every night Emma came. Home exhausted. It was all to protect Maya from the shame Emma had carried since childhood. But Mom, Maya said carefully, what if accepting help doesn't have to mean losing dignity? What if the food drive was just neighbors helping neighbors, not charity that comes with judgment? Emma laughed, but it was bitter. You think Mrs. Patterson throwing away your Christmas presents was about neighbors helping neighbors? Maya thought about Jamie's revelations, about Mrs. Patterson's grief and anger and financial struggles. I think Mrs. Patterson is drowning in her own problems and she's looking for someone to blame. But that doesn't mean everyone in this building thinks the way she does. Emma was quiet, considering this. When I donated to that food drive, she said slowly, I wasn't trying to show off. I was trying to prove something to myself. That even when we're struggling, we can still be people who help others. That poverty doesn't have to make us small or selfish. But it hurt Mrs. Patterson's feelings, Maya said. Because she's struggling too, and she saw you giving away food when maybe we needed it ourselves. Emma's face crumpled. I never thought. I was so focused on how it felt to be the giver instead of the receiver that I didn't consider how it might look to someone else, who was barely keeping their head above water. Maya squeezed her mother's hand. Tell me about the jobs, Mom. All of them. How much you make, how much we need, what we're really dealing with. Emma took a shaky breath. The janitorial job pays $8.50 an hour for 25 hours a week. The retail job is $10 an hour, but they only give me 15 hours. The catering is good money, 15 an hour, but it's only weekends, and sometimes there aren't any events. Maya did the math in her head. Even if Emma worked every available hour, it wasn't enough for rent, utilities, food, and all the small expenses that came with keeping a 12-year-old fed and clothed. We're always about $200 short every month, Emma continued. I've been using the credit card to make up the difference, but the balance keeps growing. And Maya, I'm so tired. Some nights I fall asleep standing up while I'm mopping floors. Maya felt tears streaming down her own face now. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're 12 years old. Because it's my job to worry about money. Not yours. Because I wanted you to feel safe and secure even if I don't. But I could help, Maya said. I could get a paper route or babysit or… No. Emma's voice was firm. You could, but you shouldn't have to. Your job is to be a kid, to do well in school, to dream about your future. My job is to make sure you have that chance. Maya understood now why Mrs. Patterson's actions had been so devastating to Emma. It wasn't just about the ruined presents. It was about someone deciding that Emma's sacrifices weren't enough, that her daughter didn't deserve the Christmas, morning she'd worked so hard to provide. Mom, Maya said quietly, what if we tried something different? What if instead of hiding how hard things are, we let our neighbors know we're all struggling together? What if we stopped pretending and started helping each other? Emma looked at her daughter with something like wonder. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, Maya replied, squeezing Emma's hand. Emma wiped her eyes, and for the first time since Christmas morning, she smiled. It's scary, Mija. Being vulnerable with people, letting them see that you need help. It's scary being alone too, Maya pointed out. And we're not the only ones in this building who are barely making it. Maybe if we all stopped pretending to be okay, we could actually help each other instead of judging each other. Emma nodded slowly. What do you want to do? Amaya thought about Mr. Chen's loneliness, Sophia's guilt, Jamie's struggle to help his grieving mother, Mrs. Patterson's desperate attempt to make sense of her own pain. All of them isolated by pride and fear, and the assumption that their problems were too big or too shameful to share. I want to bring everyone together, Maya said. I want to have a real conversation about what's actually happening in this building. Not the pretend version where everyone's fine, but the truth. Emma studied her daughter's face, seeing a determination that reminded her of herself at that age. The same fierce protective instinct, but directed outward toward community instead of inward toward family survival. That's a big risk, Mija. Some people won't want to be honest. Some people will judge us for our struggles. Some people already are, Maya pointed out. At least this way, we'll know who our real neighbors are. That's a big risk, Mija. Some people won't want to be honest. Some people will judge us for our struggles. Some people already are, Maya pointed out. At least this way, we'll know who our real neighbors are. Emma studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? Maya felt a surge of gratitude and nervous energy. Help me talk to people. Help me convince them that we need to have this conversation. 2 hours later, Maya stood outside Mr. Chen's apartment, Emma beside her for moral support. When the door opened, Mr. Chen's eyes went immediately to Emma, and Maya saw something shift in his expression, a recognition of shared understanding that came from watching someone work themselves to exhaustion for their child. Mrs. Rodriguez, Mr. Chen said formally, then looked at Maya. I assume this is about more than investigating the Christmas incident. We want to call a building meeting, Maya said. All the residents, tonight, if possible, to talk about what happened, but also about other things. Things that affect all of us. Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose. That's ambitious. Most people in this building prefer to keep their business private. Maybe that's the problem, Emma said quietly. Maybe, if we all knew what everyone else was dealing with, we'd be less likely to make assumptions about each other. Mr. Chen studied Emma's face, seeing something there that made him step back and open his door wider. Come in. Let's talk about what you have in mind. An hour later, they had a plan. Mr. Chen would use his position as the building's unofficial observer to approach the families who might be most receptive. Emma would talk to the neighbors she'd helped with small favors over the years, holding doors, carrying groceries, offering quiet assistance that built trust without fanfare. Maya would handle the younger residents and anyone else who might respond better to her direct approach. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, word had spread through the building that there would be a meeting in the community room at 7 p.m. Maya spent the intervening hours pacing their apartment, alternately convinced that no one would show up and terrified that everyone would. At 6:50, Maya and Emma made their way downstairs to find the community room, a space that was rarely used except for official building business, already half full. Mr. Chen sat in the front row, having claimed his usual position as observer. Sophia was there with her parents, the Kim family looking uncertain but present. Jamie had convinced several of the younger residents to attend, and to Maya's surprise, even Mrs. Kowalski from 2A had made her way downstairs, her walker positioned, carefully beside her chair. Mrs. Patterson was notably absent. Maya stood at the front of the room, her notes, carefully prepared but now feeling inadequate, clutched in her sweaty hands. She looked out at the assembled faces and felt her courage wobble. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I know this is unusual calling a meeting like this, and I know some of you might be wondering why a 12-year-old is standing up here talking to you about building business." She paused, gathering strength from Emma's encouraging nod. "This morning, I found my Christmas presents in the dumpster. Someone had taken them from our apartment and thrown them away, with a note that said, 'Santa doesn't visit.' And then, the rest was torn off." Maya heard murmurs ripple through the small crowd, shock, sympathy, confusion. "At first, I just wanted to find out who did it and why. But as I started talking to people in the building, I realized that what happened to my family was just one symptom of a bigger problem. We're all living in the same building, but we don't really know each other. We make assumptions about each other's lives. And sometimes those assumptions lead to judgment. And sometimes that judgment leads to people getting hurt." Mrs. Kim leaned forward slightly, her expression concerned. "Who took your presents, Maya?" Maya glanced at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "Mrs. Patterson. She admitted it this morning. She said she was trying to teach my family a lesson about gratitude, because she thought we were acting entitled when my mom donated to the food drive instead of taking from it." The silence that followed was thick with discomfort. Maya could see people shifting in their seats, some looking at each other with expressions that suggested they'd heard Mrs. Patterson's opinions about various neighbors before. "Mrs. Patterson made a terrible choice," Maya continued. "But she made it because she's been struggling with grief and financial problems, and she felt like my family was somehow judging her by not accepting help. The truth is, my mom works 3 jobs and we still come up short every month. My mom donated to the food drive because she was trying to prove to herself that we could still help others even when we needed help ourselves." Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "The problem isn't that Mrs. Patterson is a bad person. The problem is that we're all dealing with hard things, but we're dealing with them alone. We're all pretending to be okay when maybe none of us are completely okay." Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Maya's right about people making assumptions. I've lived in this building for 30 years, and I've watched neighbors make judgments about each other based on very little information." He stood up slowly, using his cane for support. "When my wife Margaret died 2 years ago, I stopped talking to people, stopped participating in building activities. Some of you probably thought I was just a grumpy old man who didn't like company. The truth is, I was drowning in loneliness, and I didn't know how to ask for help. Mrs. Kowalski spoke up from her seat near the back. I heard you crying sometimes, through the walls. I wanted to check on you, but I didn't know if it was my place. Mr. Chen's face softened. I wish you had. I could have used a friend. Maya felt something shift in the room, a loosening of the careful boundaries people had maintained. Sophia's father, who rarely spoke English in front of neighbors despite his fluency, said quietly, "We struggle too, with feeling like outsiders. Our business does well, but we are still immigrants. Still learning how to be part of community without seeming like we think we are better than others." You brought kimchi to Mrs. Patterson when her husband died, Emma said. I remember seeing you at her door with that container. That was kind. She seemed so angry, Mrs. Kim added. We wanted to help, but we didn't know how. We worried that offering money would be insulting, but we didn't know what else to do. Jamie stood up from the back of the room. My mom has been angry, he said, his voice carrying the weight of months of worry. Since my dad died, everything has been harder. Money, grief, trying to manage the building responsibilities while dealing with our own problems. She's been taking out her frustration on people who didn't deserve it. Where is she tonight? Mr. Chen asked gently. In our apartment, too ashamed to face everyone, Jamie replied. She knows what she did was wrong, but she doesn't know how to fix it. Maya looked around the room, seeing faces that were more open than they'd been when the meeting started. Maybe the way to fix it is to stop pretending we all have everything figured out. Maybe we could help each other instead of judging each other. Mrs. Kowalski raised her hand like she was in school. I get lonely too. My son calls once a month, and I spend most days talking to the television. I'd love to have neighbors to talk to, but I was always afraid of being a burden. You're not a burden, Sophia said suddenly, surprising everyone, including herself. I see you sometimes when I come home from school and you always wave. It makes me feel less alone in this building. Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her neighbors, people who had shared the same hallways and stairwells for years, finally begin to see each other as human beings with complex lives and struggles. What if we did this regularly? Emma suggested. Not just when there's a crisis, but maybe once a month? Just to check in with each other, share what's going on, see if anyone needs help or has help to offer. Mr. Chen nodded approvingly. In my experience, the best communities are the ones where people know each other's names and stories, where help flows naturally because people understand what their neighbors are facing. I could teach cooking classes, Mrs. Kim offered tentatively. Korean food, but also just cooking on a budget. I learned many tricks when we first came to America. I know a lot about navigating social services, Emma said. Medicaid, food assistance, job training programs. I could help people figure out what they might be eligible for if they wanted. Maya watched this spontaneous planning session with wonder. What had started as her investigation into ruined Christmas presents was turning into something much larger, a genuine effort to build community where only isolation had existed before. We should talk to Mrs. Patterson, Maya said. Not to punish her, but to include her. She's part of this community too, and she's struggling just like the rest of us. Jamie's face showed both gratitude and concern. She might not be ready for that. She's pretty embarrassed about this morning. Then we'll be patient, Mr. Chen said. Community building isn't a one-day project. It takes time to rebuild trust after it's been broken. Sophia raised her hand hesitantly. What about the Christmas presents? Maya, your mom worked so hard for those gifts, and they're ruined. Maya looked at Emma, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. Honestly, the presents don't matter as much anymore. What matters is that we're talking to each other, that we're trying to understand each other instead of making assumptions. The presents matter, Mrs. Kim said firmly. Someone needs to make this right. We all do, Mr. Chen said. Mrs. Patterson needs to take responsibility for what she did. But we all need to take responsibility for creating a community where people feel safe asking for help instead of lashing out in pain. Maya looked around the room at faces that had been strangers that morning and were becoming neighbors now. The meeting had accomplished more than she'd dared to hope, not just addressing the immediate crisis, but beginning to address the underlying isolation and judgment that had made the crisis possible. As people began to gather their things and say their goodbyes, promising to think about what they could contribute to future meetings, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Detective Santos standing behind her, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Maya Rodriguez?" he said. "I understand there's been some trouble in your building. I'd like to talk to you about filing a report." The room fell silent as neighbors realized that the police had arrived. Maya felt the fragile trust they'd been building threaten to shatter under the weight of official intervention. The room fell silent as neighbors realized that the police had arrived. Maya felt the fragile trust they'd been building threaten to shatter under the weight of official intervention. Detective Santos was younger than Maya had expected, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes and an easy manner that seemed at odds with the tension his presence had created. He wore plain clothes rather than a uniform, and his badge was clipped discreetly to his belt rather than displayed prominently. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Someone called our community liaison office about harassment and potential theft in this building. I'm Detective Luis Santos, and I specialize in neighborhood mediation." Maya looked around the room, seeing the careful walls that had just started to come down beginning to rebuild themselves. Mrs. Kowalski gripped her walker more tightly. The Kim family exchanged worried glances. Even Mr. Chen, who had been so supportive, seemed to withdraw slightly. "Who called?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The report was filed anonymously," Detective Santos replied. "But it mentioned a 12-year-old girl whose Christmas presents were stolen and destroyed, and concerns about ongoing harassment of families in the building." Emma stepped forward, her protective instincts overriding the progress they'd just made. "Detective, we appreciate your concern, but this is a community matter. We're handling it ourselves." Detective Santos nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that perspective, Mrs. Rodriguez. But theft is still theft, even when it happens between neighbors, and harassment can escalate if it's not addressed properly." Maya felt caught between competing loyalties. Part of her wanted justice, wanted Mrs. Patterson to face real consequences for what she'd done. But another part of her, the part that had just watched neighbors begin to trust each other, worried that involving the police would destroy everything they'd built. "Can we talk privately?" Maya asked. "Just for a few minutes?" Detective Santos agreed, and Maya led him to a corner of the community room while the other residents waited in uncomfortable silence. "The person who took my presents was Mrs. Patterson, the building supervisor," Maya said quietly. "She admitted it this morning. She said she was trying to teach my family a lesson about gratitude." Detective Santos pulled out a small notebook. "That's theft, Maya. And depending on the value of what was taken, it could be a felony." "They were Christmas presents from the dollar store," Maya said. "Maybe $20 total. But that's not the point." "What is the point?" Maya looked back at her neighbors, seeing faces that reflected her own uncertainty about how to proceed. "The point is that Mrs. Patterson is grieving and struggling financially, and she made a terrible choice because she felt desperate and alone. The point is that if you arrest her, you'll destroy any chance we have of building a real community here." Detective Santos studied Maya's face with interest. "Tell me more about that." Maya explained about the building meeting, about the isolation and assumptions and judgments that had led to the Christmas morning incident. She talked about Mr. Chen's loneliness, the Kim family's feelings of being outsiders, her own mother's pride and exhaustion, We're all struggling in different ways, Maya concluded. But we were starting to figure out how to help each other, instead of hurting each other. If Mrs. Patterson gets arrested, everyone will go back to their apartments and lock their doors and pretend they don't have problems. Detective Santos was quiet for a moment, considering. What would you like to see happen? I want Mrs. Patterson to understand why what she did was wrong. I want her to make it right, not just to my family, but to the whole community. I want us to figure out how to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. That sounds like restorative justice, Detective Santos said. It's an approach that focuses on healing harm rather than just punishing wrongdoing, but it requires willing participation from everyone involved, including the person who caused the harm. Maya felt a spark of hope. Would you be willing to try that, instead of just arresting her? Detective Santos looked around the room at the assembled neighbors. Let me talk to everyone here first. Get a sense of what the community wants and needs. Maya returned to the group, and Detective Santos addressed the room with the same calm authority he'd shown with her. I understand you've all been discussing a situation involving stolen Christmas presents and community tensions, he began. Maya has told me about your interest in addressing this as a community rather than through traditional criminal justice. I'd like to hear from all of you about what that might look like. Mr. Chen spoke first. Mrs. Patterson made a serious mistake, but arresting her won't solve the underlying problems that led to it. It will just create new problems. Respectfully, Mrs. Kim said, theft is theft. If someone in this building thinks they can take other people's property without consequences, what's to stop it from happening again? Consequences don't have to mean jail, Emma said. There are other ways to hold people accountable. Detective Santos nodded. Mrs. Kim raises an important point about accountability. In restorative justice, we focus on 3 questions. What harm was done? Who was affected by that harm? And what needs to happen to repair that harm and prevent it from happening again? Jamie, who had been silent since Detective Santos arrived, finally spoke up. My mom is upstairs right now, too ashamed to face anyone. She knows what she did was wrong, and she's terrified that she's going to lose her job and our housing and any chance of keeping our family together. Where does she work? Detective Santos asked. She's the building supervisor, Jamie explained. She manages maintenance and tenant relations for the property management company. If she gets arrested for harassment or theft, she'll definitely lose that job. Maya felt the weight of that revelation. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just facing potential criminal charges. She was facing the loss of everything her family had left. Detective Santos made notes as he spoke with each resident, asking about their concerns, their needs, their vision for moving forward. Maya watched him work and realized he was doing something she'd tried to do earlier, creating space for people to be honest about their situations without fear of judgment. After 20 minutes of conversation, Detective Santos asked if he could speak with Mrs. Patterson directly. She might not answer the door, Jamie said. She's pretty scared right now. Would you be willing to ask her to come down? Detective Santos suggested. Tell her I'm here to listen, not to arrest anyone. Jamie disappeared upstairs while the rest of them waited in tense silence. Maya found herself hoping that Mrs. Patterson would agree to come down, that she'd be willing to participate in whatever process Detective Santos had in mind. When Jamie returned, he was followed by Mrs. Patterson, who looked like she'd aged years since the morning confrontation. Her eyes were red from crying, and she moved with the careful posture of someone expecting to be attacked. Mrs. Patterson, Detective Santos said gently, I'm Detective Santos. I understand there was an incident involving some Christmas presents that belonged to the Rodriguez family. Mrs. Patterson's voice was barely audible. I took them. I threw them away. I know it was wrong. Can you tell me why you did that? Mrs. Patterson glanced around the room at her neighbors, her face flushing with shame. I I was angry. At everyone. At my husband for dying and leaving us in debt. At myself for not being able to handle everything. At families like the Rodriguezes, who seemed to manage their struggles with more grace than I could manage mine. Her voice broke. I saw Emma donate to the food drive when I knew they needed help themselves, and I felt like she was showing off, like she was proving that good. Poor people don't accept charity, they give it. And it made me feel like a failure because I've been so bitter and angry about our situation. Detective Santos listened without interruption as Mrs. Patterson continued. I thought if I ruined Maya's Christmas morning, it would somehow prove that no one could handle hardship without breaking down, that it was normal to be angry and bitter when life wasn't fair. She looked directly at Maya. I wanted you to feel as helpless and frustrated as I felt. The honesty was brutal and complete. Maya felt her anger warring with sympathy as she watched this woman expose her deepest, ugliest motivations. Do you understand why what you did was harmful? Detective Santos asked. Yes, Mrs. Patterson whispered. I took away something that Emma worked so hard for. I violated Maya's home and safety. I used my position as building supervisor to hurt people I was supposed to help. And I taught my son that it's okay to hurt other people when you're in pain. Detective Santos looked around the room. Mrs. Patterson has acknowledged the harm she caused and taken responsibility for her actions. The question now is what needs to happen to repair that harm and prevent it from happening again. Maya surprised herself by speaking first. I want her to understand that my mom's generosity wasn't about showing off. It was about trying to maintain dignity in a situation that often feels undignified. I want her to see that we're all struggling, and that struggling together is better than struggling alone. I want assurance that this kind of judgment and retaliation won't happen again, Mrs. Kim said. That people in this building can make choices about charity and community involvement without fear of being punished for them. I want help for Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Chen said unexpectedly. Not just consequences, but actual support for dealing with her grief and financial struggles. Punishment without help just creates more problems. Detective Santos turned to Mrs. Patterson. What do you think needs to happen? Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. I need to replace Maya's Christmas presents. I need to apologize to the whole community for creating an atmosphere of judgment and fear. And I need to figure out how to deal with my grief and anger without taking it out on other people. Are you willing to participate in a restorative justice process? Detective Santos asked. It would involve mediated conversations with the people you've harmed, community service that addresses the harm you've caused, and potentially counseling to help you develop better coping strategies. Mrs. Patterson nodded. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Detective Santos looked around the room. Is everyone willing to participate in this process instead of pursuing criminal charges? Maya looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Around the room, she saw other neighbors indicating their agreement. Yes, Maya said. But I want this to be about more than just punishing Mrs. Patterson. I want it to be about building the kind of community where people feel safe asking for help before they get desperate enough to hurt other people. Detective Santos smiled, for the first time since arriving. That's exactly what restorative justice is supposed to accomplish. It's not just about fixing one incident. It's about strengthening the community so that future incidents are less likely to occur. Maya felt a cautious optimism. They weren't just going to punish Mrs. Patterson and hope for the best. They were going to work together to address the underlying issues that had made the Christmas morning incident possible. But she also knew that the real work was just beginning. Building trust would take time, and there would be setbacks along the way. The question was whether their fragile community had the strength to see the process through. Maya felt a cautious optimism. They weren't just going to punish Mrs. Patterson and hope for the best. They were going to work together to address the underlying issues that had made the Christmas morning incident possible. But she also knew that the real work was just beginning. Building trust would take time, and there would be setbacks along the way. The question was whether their fragile community had the strength to see the process through. Detective Santos pulled out a legal pad and set it on the table in the center of the room. Let's start by identifying all the different types of harm that occurred, and then we'll work on solutions that address each one. Maya watched as neighbors who had barely spoken to each other that morning began to engage in careful, thoughtful conversation about justice and healing. The immediate harm was to Maya and her family, Mr. Chen said. Christmas presents destroyed, sense of safety violated, trust broken. But there was broader harm too, Emma added. Mrs. Patterson used her position of authority to punish people for their personal choices. That affects everyone's sense of security in the building. Sophia spoke up hesitantly. There was harm to Mrs. Patterson's son, too. Jamie had to watch his mother do something he knew was wrong, and he had to choose between loyalty to family and doing what was right. Jamie looked surprised to be included in the conversation about harm. Yeah, it's been hard, watching Mom struggle and not knowing how to help her without enabling behavior that hurts other people. Detective Santos made notes as people spoke. What about the harm to community trust, to the possibility of neighbors helping each other? Mrs. Kim nodded. We were all more isolated after this incident, more afraid to reach out, more likely to make assumptions about each other's motivations. Mrs. Patterson, who had been sitting silently through this discussion, finally spoke. I caused all of that. I let my own pain become an excuse to hurt other people, and I used my position to do it. I made everyone in this building less safe. Her voice was steady now, less shaky than it had been earlier. Maya could see that acknowledging the full scope of the harm was somehow helping Mrs. Patterson understand the magnitude of what she'd done. Now let's talk about what needs to happen to repair that harm, Detective Santos said. Mrs. Patterson, what do you think your responsibilities are? Mrs. Patterson took a deep breath. I need to replace Maya's Christmas presents with new ones that are just as thoughtful as what Emma originally chose. I need to apologize to every family in this building for creating an atmosphere of judgment and surveillance. And I need to figure out how to do my job as building supervisor without letting my personal struggles affect how I treat residents. What else? Detective Santos prompted gently. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, thinking. I need to get help for my grief and anger. Counseling? Maybe support groups. I can't keep expecting my son to manage my emotions for me, and I can't keep taking my pain out on other people. Maya felt something ease in her chest. This wasn't the defensive, angry woman from the morning confrontation. This was someone taking genuine responsibility for the harm she'd caused. What about the community? Detective Santos asked, looking around the room. What role does everyone else have in making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again? Mr. Chen leaned forward in his chair. We need better communication systems. Regular meetings like Maya suggested, but also informal ways for people to let neighbors know when they're struggling. A buddy system, Mrs. Kowalski suggested, like they had during the war. Everyone checks on someone and someone checks on them. Emma nodded thoughtfully. And we need to be more honest about our own struggles. The reason Mrs. Patterson felt so isolated in her anger was partly because the rest of us were pretending to have everything figured out. Sophia raised her hand like she was in school. Maybe we could have resource sharing, like my mom could teach cooking classes, and Mr. Chen knows a lot about navigating social services because of his postal work, and Emma could help people figure out job training programs. Maya watched the ideas build on each other, seeing the possibility of genuine community emerging from the crisis that had brought them together. I could organize a monthly potluck, Mrs. Kim offered. Nothing fancy. Just a chance for people to eat together and talk about what's going on in their lives. And I could help people with basic financial literacy, Jamie said. I've learned a lot about budgeting and debt management since Dad died. Maybe it would help other families avoid some of the mistakes we made. Detective Santos looked impressed. These are excellent ideas, but they only work if people actually follow through. How do we make sure this doesn't just become good intentions that fade away after a few weeks? Maya stood up, feeling a sudden clarity about what needed to happen. We make it official. We write it down and we all sign it. Not like a legal contract, but like a community agreement. And we check in regularly about how it's working. She looked around the room, seeing nods of agreement from her neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, Maya continued, your apology needs to be more than just words. You need to show us that you understand why what you did was wrong, and you need to take action to make sure it doesn't happen again. Mrs. Patterson nodded. What would that look like? Maya thought for a moment. You could write a letter to the property management company explaining what happened and recommending that they implement tenant rights protections. You could research grief counseling resources and share them with other families who might need them. And you could work with us to create guidelines for how building supervisors should handle conflicts between residents. Detective Santos smiled. Those are excellent restorative actions. They address the harm while also contributing to community improvement. Mrs. Patterson looked directly at Maya. Would you be willing to help me with that? I don't trust my own judgment right now about what's fair or appropriate. Maya felt surprised by the request, but also honored. Yes, but I want Jamie involved. Too, and Mr. Chen, and Detective Santos. This needs to be a community process, not just between you and me. Agreed, Mrs. Patterson said. Detective Santos made more notes. Let's talk about timeline and accountability. When will these various actions happen, and how will you check in with each other about progress? They spent the next hour working out details. Mrs. Patterson would replace Maya's Christmas presents within a week, research counseling resources within 2 weeks, and draft the letter to property management within a month. The community would hold their first official potluck meeting in 2 weeks, and they'd establish monthly check-ins after that. What about immediate support? Emma asked. Mrs. Patterson, you mentioned financial struggles. Is there practical help the community can provide right now? Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. I don't know if I have the right to ask for help after what I did. Making mistakes doesn't disqualify you from being part of the community, Mr. Chen said firmly. It just means you have work to do to rebuild trust. Mrs. Kim spoke up. Our business has been doing well this year. We could help with some bills if you'd be comfortable accepting that. And I know people at the food bank who could connect you with other resources, Emma added. No judgment, no strings attached, just neighbors helping neighbors. Maya watched Mrs. Patterson struggle with accepting help, seeing her own mother's pride reflected in the older woman's face. It's hard to accept help when you're used to being the one who provides it, Maya said gently. But part of building community means letting other people help you sometimes. Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes. Thank you. Yes, we could use help. Detective Santos looked around the room. I'm impressed by what you've all accomplished. Here. You've taken a situation that could have destroyed community trust and turned it into an opportunity to build something stronger. What happens next? Jamie asked. With the official investigation, I mean. I'll file a report recommending that no criminal charges be pursued, given the community's commitment to restorative justice, Detective Santos said. But I'll also check in periodically to make sure the process is working for everyone involved. Maya felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by the weight of responsibility. They'd avoided the punitive consequences that could have destroyed Mrs. Patterson's family, but now they had to prove that their alternative approach could actually work. There's one more thing, Sophia said quietly. Maya, your Christmas presents. I know Mrs. Patterson is going to replace them, but I was thinking maybe we could all contribute something small. Not expensive gifts, but things that show we're all part of your Christmas story now. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. You don't have to do that. We want to, Mr. Chen said. "You brought us together today. You showed us how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. That's worth celebrating." Emma squeezed Maya's hand. "It's okay to let people give you things, Mija. It doesn't make us weak or needy. It makes us connected." Maya looked around the room at faces that had been strangers that morning and were becoming friends now. "Okay, but nothing expensive. And I want to contribute something to everyone else too. Maybe we could make it a tradition. Whenever someone in the building has a birthday or a hard time or something to celebrate, we all contribute something small. A community gift exchange," Mrs. Kowalski said, her face lighting up. "I love that idea." Detective Santos packed up his notebook. "I'll check in with you all in a few weeks to see how things are progressing. Maya, I want you to know that what you did today, bringing people together to solve problems instead of just assigning blame, that's real leadership." As neighbors began to say their goodbyes and make plans for their next meeting, Maya felt exhausted but hopeful. They'd transformed the worst Christmas morning of her life into the beginning of something she'd never had before, a real community. But she also knew the real test would come in the weeks and months ahead, when the initial energy faded and people had to choose again and again to prioritize community over convenience, understanding over judgment. Looking around at her neighbors, Mrs. Patterson's tear-streaked but determined face, Jamie's relief at having support for his family's struggles, Mr. Chen's renewed engagement with the world, Sophia's growing confidence, Maya felt confident that they would make those choices. They had learned that Christmas spirit wasn't about perfect presents wrapped in beautiful paper. It was about people choosing to see each other's humanity, even when that choice was difficult. Part 10. New traditions they had. Learned that Christmas spirit wasn't about perfect presents wrapped in beautiful paper. It was about people choosing to see each other's humanity, even when that choice was difficult. 3 weeks later, Maya stood at her bedroom window looking down at the building's back alley, where she'd found her ruined Christmas presents. The dumpsters were still there, but they looked different now. Less like symbols of violation and more like ordinary containers that served a practical purpose in the life of their small community. So much had changed since that December morning. The most obvious difference was the sound level in the building. Where once there had been careful silence punctuated by the occasional argument or television turned up too loud, now there was the comfortable murmur of people who knew each other. Conversations in hallways, doors opening to share food or ask for small favors, children's laughter echoing in the stairwells. Maya's relationship with her mother had deepened in ways she hadn't expected. Emma still worked her 3 jobs, but she'd started accepting help when neighbors offered it. Mrs. Kim brought them homemade soup twice a week, and Mr. Chen had taken to walking Maya to school on mornings when Emma was sleeping off a night shift. In return, Maya helped Mrs. Kowalski with her grocery shopping, and Emma used her retail connections to help other residents find deals on necessities. The community support network they'd imagined during that first building meeting had become real in small, practical ways. Jamie had created a shared bulletin board where people could post job opportunities, resource information, and requests for help. Sophia had started a tool library in the basement storage room where residents could borrow everything from power drills to cake pans. Mrs. Patterson had researched and compiled a comprehensive guide to local social services, which she'd copied and distributed to every apartment. Mrs. Patterson herself had changed the most visibly. She'd started grief counseling 2 weeks after the restorative justice meeting, and the difference was striking. The hard edges of anger that had defined her interactions for months had softened into something more genuine. Still sad, still struggling, but no longer bitter. She'd apologized individually to every family in the building, not with the defensive justifications of someone making excuses, but with the plain honesty of someone who understood the harm she'd caused. The replacement Christmas presents had arrived exactly 1 week after the community meeting, as promised. But they came with something Maya hadn't expected: a handwritten letter from Mrs. Patterson explaining not just why she'd taken the original gifts, but what she'd learned about herself in the process of making amends. Maya had kept the letter, reading it sometimes when she needed to remember that people were capable of change. More meaningful than the replacement presents, though, were the small gifts that had appeared throughout January from various neighbors. Mr. Chen had given her a notebook and encouraged her to write down her observations about people and community, the beginning of what would become her journalism practice. Sophia had drawn her a portrait that captured something in Maya's expression that she hadn't known was there: determination mixed with compassion. The Kim family had taught her to make kimchi, and Mrs. Kowalski had shared stories about the neighborhood from 40 years ago when she'd first moved in as a young mother. Maya's school had started to feel different too. Her English teacher had noticed the change in her writing, more nuanced, more interested in exploring different perspectives on the same situation. When Maya had tentatively shared the story of the Christmas morning incident and its resolution, Mrs. Rodriguez had encouraged her to submit it to the school newspaper. The article, titled "When Community Justice Works Better Than Criminal Justice," had been published in the January edition and had sparked discussions in several classrooms about alternative approaches to conflict resolution. Detective Santos had checked in twice, as promised. His visits had evolved from official follow-ups to informal conversations about community policing and restorative justice. He'd told Maya that their building was becoming a model for other neighborhood disputes, and that the property management company was considering implementing tenant mediation policies based on their experience. Now, as Maya watched the early evening light fade over their small corner of the city, she was preparing for their New Year's Eve community gathering, the first official celebration their building family would share together. The community room had been transformed for the occasion. Sophia and her parents had contributed decorations that turned the bland institutional space into something warm and welcoming. Mrs. Kowalski had made pierogi using her grandmother's recipe, and the Kim family had prepared enough Korean barbecue to feed twice their number. Emma had coordinated with other residents to ensure there was something for every dietary restriction and cultural preference. Maya arrived early to help set up, finding Mrs. Patterson already there, arranging folding chairs in conversational clusters rather than formal rows. The older woman looked up when Maya entered, and her smile held none of the forced brightness that had characterized their interactions before Christmas. "Maya," Mrs. Patterson said warmly, "I wanted to thank you again for helping me draft that letter to the property management company. They called this week to say they're implementing our suggestions about tenant mediation in 3 other buildings." Maya felt a flush of pride. "Really? That's amazing. Your idea about having trained community mediators available for conflicts, that was brilliant. You probably prevented a lot of families from going through what we went through." As other residents began to arrive, Maya watched the easy interactions that had replaced the careful politeness of 3 weeks ago. Mr. Chen and Jamie were engaged in an animated discussion about local history. Apparently Mr. Chen's 30 years of postal routes had given him an encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood changes. Sophia was teaching Mrs. Kowalski's granddaughter, who was visiting for the holiday, how to fold origami cranes. Emma entered carrying a pot of her mother's recipe for pozole, which she'd finally felt comfortable sharing with neighbors. Maya knew that offering this particular dish, something connected to Emma's own family traditions, represented a level of trust and belonging that her mother had never felt safe expressing before. "How does it feel?" Emma asked quietly, joining Maya near the windows. "Seeing everyone together like this?" Maya considered the question. "Different than I expected. I thought community would feel bigger somehow, more dramatic. But this feels like family. Just family that we chose instead of being born into." Emma smiled. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose." Detective Santos arrived at 8 o'clock, bringing homemade tamales and stories about other neighborhoods where restorative justice had transformed community dynamics. Maya found herself drawn into conversations with him about the intersection of individual healing and community safety, topics that felt both sophisticated and immediately relevant to her daily life. As the evening progressed, Maya realized that the gathering had evolved into something more than a party. People were sharing updates about their lives, celebrating small victories, asking for advice about challenges. Mr. Chen announced that he'd started volunteering at the senior center, helping other widowed residents navigate social services. The Kim family shared news that their business was expanding and they'd be hiring locally. Mrs. Patterson revealed that she'd been accepted into a grief support group facilitator training program. "I want to be able to help other people who are struggling with loss," she explained, "so they don't have to go through what I went through, feeling so isolated that anger becomes the only emotion you can access." Jamie stood up during a lull in conversation. "I wanted to say something," he began, his voice carrying the confidence he'd developed over the past few weeks. 3 weeks ago, I was ashamed of my family, ashamed of how my mom was handling grief, ashamed of our financial problems, ashamed of the person I was becoming by trying to cover for her. Maya watched faces around the room, seeing the careful attention people gave to difficult honesty. "Tonight, I'm proud of my family," Jamie continued. "Not because our problems are solved, we're still dealing with debt and grief and all the same stuff, but because we're dealing with it as part of a community, instead of trying to handle it alone. Because my mom got help, instead of letting pain turn her into someone she didn't want to be. Because when we made mistakes, people gave us a chance to do better instead of just writing us off." Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Mrs. Patterson wipe her own eyes, her face showing gratitude and something that looked like peace. As 11 o'clock approached, someone suggested they go to the roof to watch fireworks from the downtown celebration. Maya found herself walking up the stairs surrounded by her neighbors, thinking about how different this felt from the isolated Christmas morning that had started everything. On the roof, with the city spread out below them and the sound of distant celebrations carrying on the cold air, Maya stood between her mother and Mr. Chen, with Sophia beside her and the rest of their building family clustered around them. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked quietly. Maya considered the question, watching the lights of their neighborhood twinkle in the darkness. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are, not because everything worked out perfectly, but because we learned how to work things out together." The first fireworks lit up the sky at exactly midnight, and Maya felt the collective intake of breath from her neighbors as they watched the celebration. But she found herself looking around at the faces illuminated by the colorful light. Faces that had become familiar, dear, essential to her sense of home. "Happy New Year!" she called out as the fireworks reached their climax. "Happy New Year!" came the chorus of voices in response, and Maya realized that for the first time in her life, she understood what that phrase really meant. Not just the hope for better circumstances in the coming year, but the confidence that whatever challenges arose, they would face them as a community. As they made their way back downstairs, Maya lingered on the stairwell landing where she'd first talked with Sophia, where so many important conversations had taken place over the past few weeks. She pulled out the notebook Mr. Chen had given her and wrote, "January 1st. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that happens to you. Sometimes getting your Christmas presents thrown away leads to getting a community you never knew you needed. Sometimes asking the right questions matters more than getting the right answers." Maya closed the notebook and headed home to apartment 3A, where Emma was making hot chocolate, and where the sounds of their neighbors settling in for the night created a soundtrack of belonging she'd never experienced before. Tomorrow, she would go back to school and tell her journalism teacher about her idea for a series of articles about alternative approaches to community conflict. She would continue helping Mrs. Patterson with her facilitator training and working with Jamie on the financial literacy workshops. She would keep building the relationships that had transformed a collection of strangers into a chosen family. But tonight, she would drink hot chocolate with her mother and listen to the comfortable sounds of their building family, grateful for the Christmas morning crisis that had taught them all the difference between presents and presents, between charity and community, between surviving and thriving. Outside their windows, the city continued its New Year's celebration, but inside their small corner of the world, Maya and Emma Rodriguez had already found what they'd been looking for all along, a place where they belonged, exactly as they were. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.